The more you chase something, the faster it runs away from you. The more desperately you need it, the less it shows up. The harder you run after money, love, or success, the quicker they slip through your fingers. This isn't poetry. It's a law. It's a law that the ancient Taoist sages discovered thousands of years ago. A law that our modern, hyper-connected, hyper-caffeinated world has completely forgotten because it goes against everything you've ever been taught. They told you to grind. They told you to hustle. They told you to grab life by the throat and never let go. But have you noticed? The ones who grip the tightest are often the ones with the emptiest hands. And the ones who finally let go are the ones who receive everything. This is the story of a single father who lost it all: his wife, his career, his dignity. A man who reached a breaking point where he literally couldn't chase anything anymore because he simply had no strength left. And at that exact second, the moment he finally stopped running, everything he had spent years chasing turned around and started chasing him. This isn't cheap motivation. This is a universal mechanism. And what you are about to hear might just be the most important thing you listen to all year. His name was Tomás Sifuentes. He was 37 years old, raising his 5-year-old son, Mateo, on his own. They lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Pilsen, a vibrant neighborhood on Chicago's Lower West Side. It was a place of colorful murals, Mexican bakeries, and streets where the warm scent of fresh corn tortillas mixed with the heavy exhaust of city buses. The year was 1999. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, no elevator, just creaking wooden stairs that groaned with every step. The radiator hissed and clanked, working only when it felt like it. In the bathroom, there was a steady leak from the sink. Tomás had long stopped trying to fix it. He just kept a blue plastic bucket underneath to catch the drops. Drip, drip, drip. Mateo slept in the only bedroom. Tomás slept in the living room on a saggy brown polyester couch he'd bought for $10 at a neighborhood yard sale. Tomás had emigrated from Zacatecas, Mexico to Chicago when he was 22. He met Patricia at 28. Mateo came along when he was 32, and Patricia left when the boy was just 3. She didn't leave for another man. She just packed a single suitcase, bought a one-way bus ticket, and left a note on the laminate kitchen table that read, "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." Tomás read that note 15 times before tucking it away in his nightstand drawer. He never threw it out, not because he hoped she'd come back, but because he needed a brutal reminder. The people you love can vanish without an explanation, and you still have to stand up the next morning. Because there's a little boy who depends on you, and that boy doesn't understand broken hearts, suitcases, or midnight buses. He only understands whether his dad is there when he opens his eyes. Tomás worked at a commercial printing press. He operated a massive roaring offset machine that vibrated so hard it shook the fillings in your teeth. His shift was 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. He'd drop Mateo off at daycare at 6:30, catch the bus, and arrive at the shop smelling of cheap toner and industrial oil, spending 9 hours feeding paper to a steel beast that never slept. The pay was decent. Not good, just decent. It covered rent, daycare, groceries, and clothes for Mateo, who was growing so fast it felt like the sky was pulling him upward by his shoulders. but there was never anything left over. Every single paycheck was a math problem that refused to balance. So, Tomás tried to force it. He worked overtime. He looked for weekend gigs. He did exactly what the hustle culture of the world told him to do. More. Always more. More sweat, more sacrifice, more hours. But more wasn't working. The harder he pushed, the sicker he got. A nagging chest cold that wouldn't clear up, chronic lower back pain, and an insomnia so thick he'd find himself staring at the water-stained ceiling at 3 a.m., counting down the minutes before his alarm screamed. The harder he chased the dollar, the faster it ran. One month he'd pay rent on time, but the washing machine would flood. The next month he'd fix the machine, but daycare fees would hike. It was like trying to outrun his own shadow. The faster he ran, the faster the shadow moved ahead of him. One evening, while Tomás was making a grilled cheese sandwich in the quiet kitchen, Mateo looked up from the table. "Daddy, why are you always tired?" Tomás froze, looking down at his son. Mateo had these wide, deep-set eyes that seemed to hold way too much wisdom for a 5-year-old. "Well, buddy, Daddy just has to work hard." Mateo frowned. "Why don't you just work less?" Tomás let out a dry laugh, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was the hollow laugh of a man confronted with a truth so simple it bruised. Why don't you work less? Because no one had ever taught him that was allowed. Everything he had ever learned told him that less effort meant failure. Letting go meant losing. Stopping meant drowning. So he kept pushing. He asked his foreman for a raise. He was told there was no budget. He took a Saturday job unloading crates at a produce warehouse. But he had to pay his neighbor, Doña Lupe, $30 to watch Mateo on Saturdays. Tomás made $60 for 8 hours of grueling labor at the warehouse. After paying Lupe, he was left with $30. $30 for 8 hours of ruining his already agonizing back. He did the math. $3.75 an hour. That was less than the cost of the ingredients for the sandwich he fed his son. He quit the warehouse after 4 weeks. His body had finally revolted. He spent 2 days paralyzed in bed with a blistering fever, while Mateo placed a cold, wet washcloth on his forehead, whispering, "You're burning up, Daddy." Staring at his son through a haze of fever, Tomás had a terrifying realization. I am doing everything right. So why is everything going so wrong? On a cold night in October, after putting Mateo to bed, Tomás sat on the edge of the brown couch. The TV was off. The apartment was dead silent, save for the rhythmic dripping water in the bathroom. Drip, drip, drip. He stared at the blank wall. He was too exhausted to even think. And in that absolute collapse of mental resistance, in that total surrender of the mind, a question bubbled up from a place he didn't know existed. What if I just stopped chasing? The thought terrified him. In his world, to stop chasing meant to quit. And quitting meant his son wouldn't eat. But the question lingered in the cold room like the smoke of an extinguished candle. What if I stopped chasing? The next morning was Saturday. He didn't have to go to the warehouse. He had nothing scheduled. Mateo woke up early, tugging his hand to go to the park, and Tomás agreed. They walked to Harrison Park. Tomás sat on a cold iron bench while Mateo ran toward the swings. It was a crisp autumn morning. The maple trees were shedding their leaves, deep reds, burnt oranges, and golds. They drifted down slowly, spinning lazily, as if they had all the time in the world to reach the concrete. Tomás watched them fall. There was something mesmerizing about it. They didn't struggle. They didn't fight the wind. They didn't panic about where they would land. They just let go, letting the current carry them exactly where they needed to be. Right next to the bench, an elderly man had set up a folding table with cardboard boxes of used books. Tomás had walked past him dozens of times and never looked twice. But today, with his mind quiet, he stood up and browsed the titles. One small, pocket-sized book caught his eye. It had a minimalist black cover with simple white text. The title mentioned something about the effortless way. He opened it to a random page and read a single sentence that made him stop breathing. Water does not struggle to flow down the mountain. It simply flows, and in its effortless yielding, it carves through solid rock. Tomás bought the book for $1. He read it that night under the dim lamp while Mateo slept. And that night, his inner landscape began to shift. The book spoke of the Tao, the ancient Chinese concept of a natural flow that governs the universe without force, noise, or struggle. It introduced him to Wu Wei, the art of effortless action, or action without friction. It didn't mean doing absolutely nothing. It meant refusing to force things. It meant refusing to swim upstream against the current of reality. But the concept that shattered his worldview was what the book called the law of reverse effort. It explained, the tighter you squeeze your fist to hold water, the faster it escapes through your fingers. But if you open your hand and place it under the stream, it fills effortlessly. The harder you try to force yourself to fall asleep, the more awake you stay. But the moment you surrender and relax, sleep finds you. The same law applies to wealth, connection, and opportunity. When you chase them with desperation and fear, they flee. But when you stop, when you center yourself, and when you begin to align instead of pursue, the polarity reverses. Everything begins to seek you. Hey, real quick, if this story is hitting home for you and you want more deep dives into the laws of human nature and alignment, take a second to hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It takes days to craft these videos, and your support keeps this channel alive. Now, let's get back to what Tomás did next, because it's where the magic actually happens. A week later, while visiting the Pilsen Public Library with Mateo, Tomás stumbled upon another book. This one didn't come from ancient China. It came from the mystical Jewish tradition of the Kabbalah. It spoke of a concept called Shefa. As Tomás read, he felt a click in his chest. Shefa was the exact same phenomenon the Taoists described, just through a different lens. It described a constant, invisible river of abundance that flows down into the physical world. An infinite current that never runs dry, but can only be received by those who have an open vessel. The mystics called this vessel the Kli, and they warned that the vessel is instantly closed by fear, anxiety, resentment, and frantic chasing, which was exactly what Tomás had been doing his entire life. He had been running, screaming, and squeezing his fist, and the water was spraying out of his hands. Two distinct traditions, two different continents, yet the exact same law. The Tao said, do not force. The Kabbalah said, open the vessel. Wu Wei said, act without friction. Coach Hadibur said, your words construct your reality. Every signpost pointed in the exact opposite direction of where Tomás had been running. So, he decided to do something that absolutely terrified him. He decided to let go. Not to stop working, but to let go of the desperation behind his work, to let go of the frantic panic that if he didn't break his body, his son would starve, to let go of fear. He realized the fear might still be there, but it didn't get to drive the car anymore. It could sit in the back seat, but Tomás was taking the wheel. He started with his words. He learned that every sentence he spoke was a decree, and he had been decreeing lack for decades. I can't afford it. I'm always short. There's no way out. Every single complaint was a direct command to his subconscious to close the vessel. Slowly, deliberately, he changed his language. I can't afford this became what I need is finding its way to me. I am exhausted became I am in transition. There is no solution became the answer is already looking for me. At first, the words felt fake, like wearing someone else's oversized coat, but he whispered them anyway. Every morning as he spread peanut butter on Mateo's toast and warmed his milk, he muttered under his breath, everything I need is coming toward me. I do not chase. I align. Then he shifted his energy at the printing press. He showed up at the exact same time, but he stopped cursing the machine when the paper jammed. He stopped complaining about the deafening noise. He stopped watching the clock. Instead, he practiced what the Tao called presence, being entirely inside the moment. No past, no future, just his hands smoothly feeding paper to the iron press with a quiet mind. His co-workers noticed almost immediately. Tomás, what's up with you lately? You're quiet. He'd just smile and shrug. Just here, man. Just here. The third shift was the most radical. He stopped looking for weekend jobs. He stopped scouring the classifieds. He stopped calling acquaintances to beg for leads. He simply paused. And in that space, he returned to something he had abandoned decades ago. He started to draw. As a boy in Zacatecas, Tomás had filled the margins of his school notebooks with sketches of wild horses, mountains, and the weathered faces of the townspeople. His teacher told him he had a gift, but his father warned him that art doesn't put food on the table. So Tomás had packed his pencils away into a cardboard box and forgot them. But one evening, as Mateo sat at the kitchen table coloring with crayons, Tomás watched him. The boy was completely lost in his world, his tongue sticking out slightly as he drew a dog that looked more like a lumpy cat. Tomás felt a sharp tug in his chest, like a string being pulled from the inside. He sat down next to his son, picked up a black crayon, and drew. He drew a rearing horse, just like the ones from his childhood. Mateo's eyes went wide. "Daddy, that's amazing! Draw another one!" Tomás drew another and another, and as his hand moved, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a deep, profound inner silence. The Wu Wei in its purest, rawest form. He wasn't forcing. He wasn't calculating. He was just flowing. From that night on, after Mateo went to sleep, Tomás drew, not to sell, not for praise, but simply to create. He bought a cheap sketchbook and a set of graphite pencils from a dollar store. That was his entire investment. He didn't need anything else. And that was the lesson. You don't need more to begin. You need less. Less noise, less hurry, less excuses, just your hands and the flow. He drew portraits of his memories, the church plaza in Zacatecas, the dry mountains, the intense eyes of his late father. Then he started drawing his reality in Pilsen. The baker down the street, in his flour-dusted apron, the towering, vibrant community murals, the neighborhood kids kicking a half-deflated soccer ball on 18th Street, the elderly woman selling warm elotes on the corner. Every drawing was a quiet conversation between Tomás and the world. And each sketch was better than the last, not because he was studying technical manuals, but because there was no resistance in his hand. The pencil moved across the paper like water carving its way down a mountain. He noticed a strange phenomenon. When he sat down to draw at 9 p.m., he'd look up, and suddenly it was midnight. 3 hours evaporated like 30 seconds. He felt no exhaustion, no back pain. He didn't even hear the leaky faucet. There was only the graphite meeting the paper. His energy was being restored, not drained. The Tao had explained this perfectly. When you act against your nature, you deplete yourself. But when you act in alignment with your nature, the universe recharges your battery. Mateo became his biggest fan. Every morning, before daycare, the boy would sprint to the kitchen table to see what his dad had created overnight. One Saturday morning, Tomás was sitting on his usual bench at Harrison Park, sketching the used bookseller. A woman stopped in her tracks to look. She was stylish, wearing a bright red scarf and holding a coffee cup. "Excuse me, did you draw that?" Tomás nodded, his English a bit rusty. The woman studied the sketch. It was a portrait of the old book vendor, his thick-rimmed glasses, his woolen vest, sitting quietly among his cardboard boxes. "This is incredible," she said. "Do you sell your work?" Tomás had never even considered it. "No," he replied. The woman pulled a card from her coat. She was the owner of a popular coffee house in Wicker Park, a trendy, artistic neighborhood a few miles north. She was looking for authentic local art to cover her brick walls. She asked if she could exhibit some of his sketches. Tomás said yes, not out of a calculated business strategy, but because it felt like the natural next step of the current. What happened next was the law of reverse effort in action. He didn't chase the opportunity found him. He bought 10 cheap wooden frames from a thrift shop, framed his sketches, and hung them in the cafe. Within a week, a customer asked for the price of the bookseller portrait. The cafe owner called Tomás. "How much do you want for it?" Tomás had no clue. He hesitated. $40? The customer paid without a second thought, pulling out 2 $20 bills. Tomás held those 2 bills in his hand for a long time. $40. The exact same amount he cleared from a grueling, painful Saturday at the warehouse. But this money didn't come from pain. It came from a pencil, gliding across a page on a quiet night while his son slept. It came from the flow. The next week, he sold 2 more. The week after, a woman bought 3 at once as a gift. She told him, "I don't know how to explain it, but these drawings, they just make me feel incredibly peaceful." Tomás smiled. He knew exactly why. Because they were created without force, greed, or calculation. The peace he felt while drawing had been transferred directly onto the paper, and people could feel it. In his first month, he sold 8 drawings, $320. He hadn't chased a single buyer. The buyers had chased him. The cafe owner told her friend who owned a bakery in Logan Square. Soon, Tomás was exhibiting there, too. A regular customer, who was a teacher at a local elementary school, asked if he would run a Saturday morning drawing workshop for kids. They offered to pay him a generous hourly rate. Another customer commissioned a custom portrait of her grandparents from an old black and white photo, paying him $80. Every single path opened up without struggle, like leaves falling from a tree, landing exactly where they needed to be. He didn't quit his job at the press right away. He was a father, not a fool, but he invested in better paper, tried watercolors, and took on custom work. A local neighborhood paper even ran a small feature on him. The Pilsen father who paints from the heart. Tomás read the headline and laughed. It was absolutely accurate. He painted what his soul dictated, not what the market demanded. And that alignment was the secret to the entire flow. But the Tao and the Kabbalah both warned of one final rule. The flow only continues if it circulates. A river that stops flowing becomes a stagnant swamp. A river that keeps moving eventually meets the ocean. So, Tomás began to give back. He drew a beautiful portrait of Doña Carmen, an elderly neighbor who had lived in his building for 30 years and had never owned a portrait of herself. When he handed it to her in a clean frame, her eyes welled with tears. "Is this really me?" "Yes, Doña Carmen, and you are beautiful." He painted a small, vibrant mural on the kitchen wall of Doña Lupe's apartment as a thank you for watching Mateo. It was a sweeping landscape of a yellow wildflower field under a deep blue sky. Doña Lupe wept, saying it looked exactly like the hills of Michoacán where she grew up. Tomás hadn't known that. He had just painted what his hand felt guided to paint. But that is how the universe works. When you are aligned, your creations serve a purpose far larger than you can comprehend. Every single act of generosity returned to him tenfold, sometimes as a new commission, sometimes as an unexpected connection, and sometimes simply as the sound of Mateo laughing in a warm room. Because Shefa does not just flow as currency. It flows as joy, as safety, as love, and as peace. 1 year after that dark night on the brown couch, Tomás sat in the exact same spot. But everything had changed. Mateo was asleep in his room. Tomás's framed sketches decorated the walls. A brand new wooden easel stood by the window, a gift from a grateful client. The bathroom sink still leaked, drip, drip, drip. But it didn't sound like a countdown to poverty anymore. It sounded like a metronome, the steady, peaceful heartbeat of an apartment that was finally alive. Tomás didn't become a millionaire. He didn't become internationally famous. But he stopped chasing. And the moment he stopped chasing, everything he actually needed began to arrive. Not early, not late, but right on time. Let me ask you a question. What did you stop doing because you were too busy chasing what you thought you had to do? What did you pack away in a dusty cardboard box because someone told you it wouldn't pay the bills? If you remember what it is, write it down in the comments below. Let this be the day you acknowledge it, because right now, someone you know is destroying their health, their relationships, and their spirit for a paycheck that still doesn't cover the rent, entirely forgetting that their hands hold a gift the world desperately needs. Share this video with them. They need to hear this today. Tonight, before you go to sleep, do what Tomás did. Turn off the television. Turn off your phone. Close your eyes. Sit in the quiet and ask yourself, what am I chasing so hard that it has no choice but to run from me? What can I finally let go of? And then whisper these words to the dark room. I stop chasing. I open my hand. What is mine is already seeking me. What is mine will find me. I flow like water, without struggle, without resistance, and the river will carry me exactly where I am meant to be. Say it until you don't just hear it in your head, but feel it settle deep inside your chest. Because the day you stop chasing is the day you finally start receiving. And that day can be today.